2026, I'm going to give you my predictions for what's going to happen in endoluminal robotics. Now, bear with me because this is a little bit of a mishmash of things together that are all endoluminal, i.e. they don't go through the abdomen or they don't go through the chest. They go through some kind of natural orifice. Doesn't mean they're all flexible, by the way, but I'm going to put them all together. So I'm going to put things like flexible endoscopy with rigid endoscopy as long as it's endoluminal. Let me start off by saying these are the categories that I'm going to talk about today. So I'm going to talk about endobronchial. So I'm going to talk about Ion, Monarch, Galaxy, and there's a whole host of Chinese ones coming. I'm going to talk a little bit about endo-urological, which is the next kind of phase of this. And then I'm going to talk about endo-gastrointestinal. So upper GI and lower GI. So let's crack on with this. And let's first of all start with endobronchial robots. So my predictions for endobronchial robots for 2026. And for those that don't know, this is a robotic kind of bronchoscope that today there's Intuitive with Ion, there's J&J with Monarch, and there's Galaxy who have their system. And what's really interesting about this space is that it's been around for a while, but it's now starting to gain pace. So far, it's been used mainly for diagnostics where you basically guide in with the robot, you get to the lesion site, and you take a sample with a needle and then you come back out. But what's kind of happened in different areas is that we've started to look at, okay, we get there, we do the biopsy, we see that it's cancer or we see that it's a lesion that needs ablating, and then we're going to try and deliver some kind of energy to it. So if you look at, there's been different things like New Wave, which is an energy device that went down, and J&J with Monarch did a trial on that. And just a few days ago, you had Ion doing the first trial with EndoWave, which is another energy device that basically goes down through the robot. And the concept is that what we want to get to in 2026 is the start of seeing see and treat. So you go into the bronchus, you get to the lesion, you biopsy the lesion, you decide that you need to make some kind of intervention, and you there and then add some kind of energy, or in the future there'll be some drug therapies as well, but for now it'll be some energy device to ablate that lesion. And that should avoid surgery in many, many patients. So the concept of this is really to go to see and treat. So my first prediction is that in 2026, we will see more and more of the growing area of see and treat within the endobronchial endoluminal space. The second thing is that one of the plagues of this has been the problem that the endoscopes that are on the end of the robot are often reusable, and it's a very complex way that you have to send them back to the factory to be refurbished. They're kind of really remanufactured and redone, and that's not a great cost model for the manufacturer, and therefore it's not that cheap to actually have them with the customer per case. Galaxy is different than that. Galaxy's got a disposable catheter that goes with their robot. And that seems to be the right way to go. So my next prediction for 2026 is that on the endobronchial side, you're going to see either development work happen on disposable bronchoscopes for the robot. The endoluminal bronchial robot will become disposable. And I think that what you'll see is potentially by the end of the year, either some first tests of it, or you're going to see, no, I don't think you're going to see clinical use of it this year, but there will be a focus on about how do we get more of these systems out there, but how do we get cost reduction? The second problem with some of these robots that's out there today is that they're incredibly complex to set up and to use. Some of them have 50 plus steps for them to really be able to use it properly. And I think what you're going to see is a refinement in software that's going to allow better navigation with more imaging systems. You're going to see the launch of improved navigation systems, simplified use of the system via software. And I think what you're really going to see is that there's going to be a design ethos thinking about how do we make this easier to use as a robot. So there's some of the big themes that I see for the endobronchial, for Ion, for Monarch, and for Galaxy. Okay, let's talk endo-urological robots. This is basically where you're going to go into the urological tract via the urethra, and then through the bladder, and then up through the ureters, up into the kidneys. This is basically where the tract goes. And there's all kinds of procedures you can do here, endo-urological, mostly done by manual scopes today, but what they're sort of aiming at is that you can use robotic scopes to do more. I'm going to talk about two types of robotic scopes here. We're going to talk about flexible endoscopic robotic scopes, which is like going to be the Monarch version of an endo robot, and I'm going to talk also about some rigid endo-urological robots like Virtuoso Surgical, and I'll go between the two. So basically, if you take a bronchial robot, an endobronchial robot, and you aim it south, you end up more or less, there's some slight differences because you're dealing with fluid as opposed to in the lung, it's an airway passage. But basically what you're going to do is you're going to be able to drive and navigate the robot up to where you need to go. And then you're going to be able to deploy either diagnostics or, in this case, more therapeutics. So laser fibers or different ways of breaking things like stones up. So one of the things that Monarch is probably leading on at this moment is in the endo-urological. They have a thing for doing PCNL, which is basically a percutaneous lithotripsy. And what they do is they have two arms that will guide the endoscopic robot up, and you'll be able to move it just like you would with the lung robot from Monarch. But then you have a third arm from outside that allows you to position either catheters or needles percutaneously to come and sort of do a rendezvous of the two pieces together. Different ways then of flushing out stone pieces, fragmenting, flushing them out, etc., etc. And there's several things you can do with this. So I do see that in 2026, Monarch will certainly take the lead in the urological aspect of endoluminal surgery. Now, there are several Chinese robots out there that are doing something similar. There are several robots out there that already do robotic scopes, but this is a little bit more than just a robotic scope. A lot of the robots that are out there will take a manual scope today and robotically drive it. So I'm not talking about that so much. Then what I think is that prediction for 2026 is that Intuitive are going to work on their iron endo-urological robot. And I don't know if we'll see it clinically used this year, but I think we might see maybe some lab work or some indication that they've got an endo-urological robot, because they're going to have to stay up with Monarch on this. And of course, you've got Galaxy. They could potentially, there's no reason why they couldn't also come down to the endo-urological tract. And there's going to be some other small tumor ablations. There's going to be different things for strictures. There's going to be stenting, and it's all going to be done robotically in the near future. The problems that I've seen today, by the way, with that is that when I've talked on to some people who've discussed the Monarch system, and I don't know if they've used it or not, so it might be unfair for them to say this, but again, they said there's 60 plus steps in the robot to use it. So again, a theme that you might see maybe 2027 rather than 2026 is simplifying and making it easier for the robot to be set up, used, reducing the number of steps, or improvements in software to make it an easier use for the user. But that's one of the first predictions, is going to be about the endoluminal flexible robots. Right, changing gears slightly. So I'm going to talk now about a couple of robots that are not the endoluminal as people think of them, but they are truly endoluminal robots. So if you look at something like Procept, so Procept is a device which some of you may know with a Hydros system, which basically uses aquablation. So what it's doing is it puts in a probe into the prostate, and what it'll do is it'll wave back and forwards, and with high pressure water it'll carve out the prostate for benign prostate hyperplasia. But it is a robot, and it has got a navigation system, and it is endoluminal, so technically it's an endoluminal robot. So I want to put this in here. So until they get the cancer application for the prostate, it's not going to directly impact onto Da Vinci. This is actually more for some of the other things like HoLEP laser, which I'll come to in a minute. Procept, the one problem that I get or I hear from people on Procept is that you need to do a mini TURP, transurethral resection of prostate afterwards. So basically it's a mini TURP, because what you're doing is just using the electrosurgery to stop some of the bleeding. There's an amount of bleeding that comes often with some Procept cases, and that's something that people say, not sure if I want to do it. I wonder whether this year in 2026 they're going to deal with that a little bit, but we'll see. But what I do expect to see is less so in the US, but more OUS, an increased growth in Procept in Asia and some more growth in Europe. So that's one thing I would expect to see there. Then what I want to see is there's a competitor coming to Procept, which is Andromeda Surgical, which is with Nick Damiano. And what he's done is he's basically realized that the gold standard today is HoLEP, holmium laser, enucleation of prostate. And what he thinks is, and I think I tend to agree with him on this, the difficulty in that procedure is the manual dexterity and the ability to sort of in your head map it out and guide the laser to take away the right piece of the prostate. So what he's doing is something very clever. He's basically built, and he would say in his own words, it's a very basic but complex piece of hardware, but the magic's not in the hardware for him. He's more of tech med than med tech. And what he believes is that you can do so much more with software. Once you've got the hardware to deliver it, you can then do so much with software. So where him and his team are at is they're trying and they're doing cases using HoLEP with their robot, but it's the AI driven software that does the planning, the mapping, and then the delivery of the laser. And it's a really interesting concept. So I do encourage you all to go and spend some time and go and see what Andromeda Surgical is doing. And I do see 2026, they're going to do clinical cases, more clinical cases. They're going to start to show that an AI driven purpose-built urological robot has really significant meaning. Procept has sort of already shown that, but HoLEP, I think, because it's just seen as more widely accepted, has the potential to really explode that. And again, it is within the cancer realm as well. So that would have an impact on the prostates that Intuitive do. Don't think it's going to happen a big impact in 2026, but I do believe that beyond 2027, if the HoLEP AI works, I think that will actually have a really big impact on the prostate. There's other things like TULSA-PRO as well, and I've done a whole video on that, so you can go and see my video on TULSA-PRO. But these are the kind of robots that are gonna be used there. Focal One is another one that's in there. Some people will say, well, they're not really a robot as such. They are, and they're endoluminal, so I just wanted to give them a brief mention here. I also want to make sure that I mention Virtuoso with Duke Harrell. So Virtuoso is not a long flexible endoscope, it's a short rigid endoscope with two end effectors that come out, and you can manipulate and have bimanual dexterity within the bladder to do something like an en-bloc resection of a tumor within the bladder. A lot of the schools of thought say that the en-bloc is the best way to do it. Very difficult manually, very difficult when you've got only a parallel approach. And I think what Duke's come up with Virtuoso is a super specific type of robot. So it's not trying to be a generalistic robot, but it's a really good application of how you can take robotics and go into a specific application and let the robot be really, really good at that one application. I think that's a theme for 2026 in many parts of robotics, which is precision, procedure specific robots are going to become more and more of a thing. And there are lots coming out of the East. There's lots coming out of China. And I think you're going to see more and more of this throughout 2026. If at this point you're finding this stuff useful, and you've not subscribed yet, because there's a lot of people who see these videos but have not subscribed yet, I do encourage you to subscribe, because every time we drop a video, if you subscribe and turn the little bell on, then what happens is you get notified when new content comes, and you don't have to rely on hopefully seeing my post on somewhere like LinkedIn or seeing my email or catching it on the blog. You'll get a direct notification to come here, and it super supports me and super supports the channel. So it really helps me if I've got support. At least it knows that I'm doing this for somebody who really wants to know that. So like and subscribe if you can. Okay, let's now get into the thing that I am really, really excited about for 2026, and this is the endoluminal GI robotics. So this is not, it's not what everyone thinks. A lot of people think that what we're talking about here is robotic colonoscopes. This is not what we're talking about here. There will be robotic colonoscopes. There's a whole set of groups across the world who are working on robotic colonoscopes, which means that they use either robotic assisted guidance for when they're getting through the colon, coming through the flexures, to stop looping, all of that kind of good stuff, which is really good. And robotic endoscopes will be very interesting. They will allow stability, they will allow shape locking so that you can have stable platforms, but there's still going to be linear parallel devices. What I'm talking about here is endoluminal bimanual dexterous robots. So the one to look at today is EndoQuest. So if you look at EndoQuest, what they've got is they have a delivery platform, which is a robotic delivery platform, so you can drive the, and I don't want to call it an endoscope, but you drive the entire platform delivery system to where you want to go, and it stays there in an incredibly stable way. And then what you can do is advance to elbowed and wristed instruments. That's the big game changer, that you've got triangulation. And the third thing they do is they have something called a cobra scope, which comes out and then comes up and looks down on the scene. What you generally do is in endoscopy, you look straight on at the scene and your instruments come straight out and straight on. So it's just like a really tunnel view with minimal amounts of sort of lateral tension that you can put on. For the first time with EndoQuest, what you've got is you've actually got a real surgical platform for within the lumen. So it's an endoluminal surgical capability robot. And I'm going to do a whole set of sessions throughout the year on endoluminal therapies and endoluminal treatments and endoluminal surgeries and transluminal surgeries. What I want to stress is that in 2026, what you're going to see is the continued IDE of EndoQuest, and I do believe that before the end of this year, they will get FDA clearance for the first colonic endoluminal robotic system. And I think that's going to be really, really important for the entire industry. And I don't want to underplay this at all. And they are going to be the leaders in this space. But a lot of other companies are seeing that if this comes, this is a major, major disruption. We must remember that Intuitive's Ion platform was actually built off NeoGuide, which was one of the original Notes robots. And there's a lot of that technology in there for the shape locking, etc., and the navigation that's in there. But that was an endoluminal and transluminal system. So they absolutely have the capability, ability, and engineers to do this. And it's an extension of Ion, but it's quite different than Ion. And what I believe is, if you imagine that they're going to use the SP platform, which will be the SP delivery, but imagine putting a long, flexible scope on the end of an SP. There's no reason they couldn't do that. And they actually have some interesting patents that have where their camera comes out and comes up and leaves a third channel. Technically, they might be able to deliver 3 instruments through this long, flexible scope. So I do believe there will be an Ion GI. Now, will it be commercially available this year? I don't believe it at all. I still think they're a way away. But I think we'll start seeing maybe some of the first clinical concepts of it, or there'll be some announcements of it, or there'll be some leaking of some people saying, oh, I've seen this system here or there. But I do believe that they're working on it, and I think by the end of this year, we might have some signs that there's an endoluminal, single port like long endoluminal Ion robot. It's like Ion and single port had a love child. Now, why that's really important is because I think they're going for an evolution from, there was originally open surgery, then there was laparoscopy, then there's multi-port robotics, single port robotics, then there'll be no port robotics, because the endoluminal is technically no port, but it's still invasive. And then eventually we'll go to things like histosonics with no invasion as well. So it'll go from open to multi-port to single port to zero port to non-invasive. I think that's the path we go. And I think 2026 we'll see some of that pathway going towards that no incision endoluminal robot. Now, I think it will be, if they go first, it'll be colonic. It's larger diameter. It's a little bit easier to do. You can get away with some shorter ones initially. Eventually, then they go to the upper GI ones, and we can talk later about things like ESD and ESG, and we can talk about EMR and all those good things later in some of my other blogs. I don't want to get too technical today. What I want to talk about is that we are going to see EndoQuest being the pioneers, but quick followers potentially. Validating this space will be people like Intuitive. Now, let's also not forget that the core technologies of Ottava and Monarch and that whole thing came out of Auris. Auris did have a whole set of endoluminal GI ideas and concepts and patents that were in there. And in fact, the first concept of Ottava that came out was a 6-arm robot, where 4 of them were for doing the laparoscopic portion and 2 of them were for doing, for example, a colonic or a transoral approach with a flexible robot. And you can go and find those patents online. I don't think they're going to combine into the 6 arms straight away, but what I do believe is they have a team working on day and night on a type of Monarch that will be for a colonoscope. And I think we could see even some preclinical or some sniffs of this early on if EndoQuest starts doing well, and if Intuitive comes out with one, then we could. Let's not rule out Medtronic here as well. Remember, Medtronic bought a company called Fortimedics, and Fortimedics has a lot of technologies that could be applied in this space. There is nothing out there, nothing definitive, and I've not seen many patents out there and things. But again, I do believe that all of the big 3 at some point will have to have a multi-port, and they'll have to have an endoluminal robot, no doubts about it. So watch this space. 2026, I think you'll see the first sniffings of this. We can't talk about endoluminal surgery without talking about the quiet horse, which is Swan Endosurgical. They have been on a massive hiring spree. They've been stealth, but that comes out of the Olympus stable with Revival Healthcare, and let us not underplay that at all. I don't believe this is Olympus's robotic endoscope. I think that's a different project within Olympus. I genuinely think this is a bimanual, highly dexterous, precise colonic robot or upper GI robot. And I think it will be more of a platform like EndoQuest than it will be a robotic endoscope. I can't find the patents anywhere. I am looking every day, and if something comes up this year, I'll show you. But what I do feel there is that they are going to poach lots and lots of staff out of lots and lots of the companies. Remember, they have a Cambridge office and they have a Boston office. They are an attractive place to be, exciting, a lot of money in them, 483 million, very exciting place to be. So they will attract a lot of the engineers, because this is going to be an engineering challenge par excellence. And 2026, what I expect to see is a flux of people going into Swan Endosurgical. And I imagine that by the end of the year, they'll start releasing maybe some snippets about what their aim is or where they're going on this. They could surprise us and come out earlier. They could be more advanced than we think, but I doubt it in 2026. What I believe is that Swan Endosurgical will remain in stealth throughout 2026. We might get some snippets at a couple of meetings of what they're trying to do. Several other companies out there trying to do this as well. einen comes out of the Strasbourg team, which is the ex-Robocath, as far as I remember, I think it is, and correct me if I'm wrong. That team there already has endoluminal robotics knowledge through endovascular robotics. So they're cooking up something, and again, I think it's going to be interesting. And then you have the multi-sheath technology coming out of Neptune, very stealth at the minute. I think you'll see a little bit more about these stealth projects sort of emerging in some preclinical work, and we might see some preclinical stuff coming out there that'll give us an indication, or we'll see some patents coming out in 2026, and I will keep you abreast of that. I cannot stress enough how important endoluminal GI robotics is going to be. This is not going to be about doing surgery with a flexible robot. This is going to be about an entire different platform game changer. This is going to change the whole way that we treat many diseases, and it's going to be radically different than what we think. I would just ask that you don't look in the rearview mirror when you're looking at intuitive and think about, okay, how are we making a flexible intuitive? That's not what this is about in my mind. And 2026, I think we'll start seeing some papers come out that start to talk about this, and in combination therapies with things like endogenics or some of the other remodeling, surface mucosal remodeling. I think you're going to start seeing some other therapies that are in there, because this is going to be about therapeutic platforms ultimately. And again, I think 2026, if you want to watch where this is going, really watch for EndoQuest, because I think they are going to be the pilot that shapes this industry. Okay, so thanks for watching that. I just wanted to give a little taster of it. Throughout the year, I'm going to drop a lot of content on all the different systems. If I see patents or I see clearances come up, then of course I'll bring them to you as fast as I can. As I say, please subscribe, like, comment. It all helps the algorithm. Even if it's just, hi Steve, I enjoyed it, or Steve, I didn't enjoy it, or if there's something specific you really would like me to talk about. But I'd love you to subscribe, like, turn the notifications on. That's what YouTube tells me to tell you, so that it can tell me that you're enjoying it. Right, so that's it. And the next one that will drop will be on the endovascular robotics, and we'll talk about the neurovascular robotics, cardiovascular robotics, cardiology robotics, and I want to really get into that. And also some of them are doing peripheral vascular as well, so we'll definitely talk about that, and I'll catch you on the next one.